Hey everybody, it's Eric from EPautos.com, your libertarian car guy. Came across something interesting yesterday that I thought was worth talking about. So I wanted to do an oil change on my old muscle car, and that's my 1976 Trans Am. So I went down to the O'Reilly's Auto Parts store to get some oil. What I found was there was almost no 1040 oil anymore. In fact, there were just two brands that had 1040, and one was like the generic El Cheapo, and the other was Valvoline, and none in synthetic. All of the other weights were 0 or 5W or something along those lines. And it's interesting to me as the owner of an old car because, you know, my old car is supposed to have 10W40. I've used 10W30 in it before, but it seems to me that that's a bit too light. I noticed more oil consumption than usual. Now granted, you know, my engine's, you know, it's a 50-year-old engine, and probably the tolerances on it are a little bit loose, certainly compared to a modern engine. But I just think it's interesting, you know, this is a measure of the passage of time, that you can't apparently find the old weight of oil any longer. And if you have an older car, make it to the point where in order to get 1040, you may have to order it online and get it shipped to you. And, you know, this is kind of similar to something else, and old car people who are listening to this will already know all about it, which is that if you have an old American car like my Trans Am that has what's called a flat tappet camshaft, i.e. a non-roller type camshaft, and pretty much all the American V8s that were made all the way up through roughly early mid-80s had these flat tappet camshafts. Well, you don't want to use just off the store shelf oil in those engines, and the reason why is because they've taken out the ZDDP, which is an acronym that basically means the zinc and I think manganese, and there's some other anti-friction materials that they used to put into the oil that they don't any longer because of emissions. And modern roller type camshafts don't need them anyway. But the point is, you know, now if you own an older car like I have, you can't just get off the store oil unless you have a bottle of the special additive that you add to the oil. Now the upside there, of course, is that you can pretty much choose any brand of oil you want, assuming that you can find the correct weight, and then you can just add the additive. And that's generally what I've been doing lately, just because you know, for a while I was using, AMSOIL offers a V-Rod formulation of oil that's designed for the older cars, but they only offer it in a really heavy 50 weight and then a lighter 10W30 or 15W30, something like that. And again, I'm just more comfortable using the OE spec oil in an old engine. I've had a number of issues crop up when I've not used the OE spec, not just in cars, also in motorcycles. Those of you who listen to me may remember, it was probably about, oh, I don't know, a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, I was having some problems with one of my old motorcycles, an 83 Honda GL650. I changed the oil and I used modern synthetic in the thing, and right after I did that, I started having issues with the starter clutch. You know, you push the starter button, and instead of it engaging, you get this whir, whir, whir. The little springs inside wouldn't clamp down, and you know, it's a real pain on that bike because in order to replace that I think it's like literally it's like a $1 spring. It's a super cheap. They're not expensive, but you have to tear down the engine to get at it. So I don't know why it occurred to me, but it did, to just go ahead and drain the oil that was in there and go back with Honda 10W40 and non-synthetic, because, you know, back in 1983 that's what they specified. They didn't have synthetics, and lo and behold, the starter worked again. Didn't have any problems. Haven't had any problems since then. So I'm not sure whether it has to do with the viscosity or the formulation or some other factor, but you know, there you have it. And your mileage may vary, but I just wanted to tell you about that. And again, circling back to my Trans Am, I'm just going to go back to what Pontiac specified back in the day. You know, I know sometimes you can use modern stuff in an old vehicle and have good results, but sometimes not. Another good example of that being E10 gas, ethanol-laced gasoline. You know, if you have an old car that was made before they started putting ethanol in the gasoline, remember that the car was designed to run on 100% gasoline. So, you know, when you feed it 90% gasoline and 10% ethanol alcohol, which is what most pump unleaded gas is now, a lot of times you'll have some issues with the thing, because essentially what happens is that fuel leans out the air-fuel mixture, and that causes the engine to run hot, or hotter than it would otherwise, and that's not a good thing. The other thing is that those old cars' fuel lines and fuel systems were not designed for high alcohol concentrations in the fuel. So you'll often find that you have problems with rubber and materials like that, soft parts, chemically deteriorating and turning into goo. You might want to consider, if you're going to be using the E10 in an older car, or a bike for that matter, replacing those parts, things like rubber fuel lines and internal parts in the carburetor, with ethanol compatible parts, as otherwise you may end up having problems you didn't want. Anyway, more over at EPautos.com, the web's best libertarian gearhead site. Thanks as always for listening, and we'll have more for you again soon.